Five Nights at Freddy's, an indie horror game series that's been around for almost 10 years now, with the movie releasing later this year. As you may know, FNaF has been constantly changing its formula and has had multiple different alterations throughout the years in how it wanted to portray itself as a game series, but especially how it wanted to do its horror. Since the franchise was ever changing, it never stuck to one specific element, and it always tried its best to make sure each element that was in the games were at its best. However, that wasn't always possible. But what the games for sure always had that gave it a reason for it to be so enjoyable was character designs, environmental designs, character dialogue, and so on. What it always did was try to take advantage of the detail. So without further ado, let's explore the sister location and figure out how FNaF's horror is hidden in detail. Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. This game was the moment FNaF changed forever, and I mean that literally. Like I mentioned previously, FNaF may not be as scary as it was maybe when you first played it, but what makes the game so accessible is the fact it isn't bloody or gory or really terrifying. It had this perfect middle ground with each entry that anyone was able to play it. However, its use of implication and detail, which will be heavily used in this game and Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator, is what made it stand out a lot. So let's go ahead and start out with the characters. Sister location has a huge cast of new animatronics, but the core four are Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy. Each one of these robots have their own specialties built into their design, which can be seen from the blueprints left in the game of the robots. However, let's look at the actual designs first. Circus Baby's design resembles that of a clown and also finds herself being the leader of the cast this time around. Although we only ever see her once in Sister location, her character is actually really mysterious and also a bit rude with how she speaks in game, but we'll cover that more in depth later. Funtime Freddy obviously being another version of Freddy, however this time with the bonbon hand puppet replacing his right hand. Funtime Freddy is a very energetic and chaotic character, which can also be heard from his voice lines. However, the bonbon hand puppet, who is the exact opposite of Freddy, is used as a way to calm him down during gameplay. Moving on to Funtime Foxy. Like Funtime Freddy, who is just another version of Freddy, Funtime Foxy is just another version of Foxy. We don't really have much to work off of for Funtime Foxy. However, from UCN, they're shown to be very enthusiastic about performing, so there's that.
I'm sorry, but there was never enough room on this stage for both of us.
And finally, Ballora. Ballora is a ballerina who's heavily shown to rely on audio cues to find her victims. She's capable of crawling around like a spider as shown in AR, but for the most part, her character is really calm and quiet, which is what gives her a huge fear factor to her character. Alright, let's take a peek at the blueprints now. Each one of these characters all have similar mechanics, but obviously they have at least one different trait. If you had noticed with each of the blueprints, all the animatronics have the same set of mechanisms that are needed for luring and capturing people. Although they may not have the same set of mechanics, they all have the same exact intentions of capturing people, as seen in Funtime Freddy's and Circus Baby's blueprints from what seems to be bodies stored inside them. Now, how does this all come into play in the actual game? It ties back into one character specifically, and that's Circus Baby. Circus Baby's introduction in the story starts off in Night 2 and acts like a sort of guide helping the player through certain encounters. From the very first few lines of dialogue from her, she's already implying that this isn't the first time this has happened, and questions his desire to want to come to a place like this. And we don't exactly know the motives either, at least not yet. During Night 3, there is no forced encounter with Circus Baby this night. However, the vent to her room opens up. Going through and going under the desk, she will start to tell a story. She referred to her being on stage once, and that it was a wonderful day. She was in a room filled with tables and balloons, children running in and out of the room, some afraid and some not. She would always count how many children in the room. 2, then 3, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 2, then none. They were always in groups of 2 or 3. She was covered in glitter and smelled like birthday cake. She started counting again. There were 2, then 3, then 5, then 4. She was able to do something special, and that was make ice cream. However, she only ever did it once. She counted again. There were 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. A little girl stood in front of her. She felt as if she was no longer herself. She stopped singing and her stomach started to open, and there was ice cream. She was unable to move. The little girl moved closer, then the sound of screaming could be heard, but only for a moment. The other children came running back into the room, unable to hear the cries of the little girl. She says she can still hear her sometimes, asking, "Why did that happen?" After this encounter and finishing Night 3, you get jumpscared by Funtime Foxy, waking up in a suit, which Baby later explains that she kidnapped you and her true colors are starting to be shown. Her character is actually really manipulative. She says after a while that she learned to pretend to be one way, but actually the other, and says that Ballora never learns and says that they think that there's something wrong on the inside, but the only thing that mattered was knowing. The scooper then goes off, destroying Ballora. Baby referred to the scooper earlier being used for ice cream or custard or sprinkles, and asked if you were a freshly opened pint of ice cream. How would you feel about something with that name? She says, thankfully a freshly opened pint of ice cream doesn't feel anything at all. This dialogue will be relevant again later. She opens the faceplates, forcing you to survive in the suit, winding up the spring locks, and fending off against the mini arenas while doing so. Surviving brings us to the final night. Everything seems to be normal until you hit the lights. The technicians mentioned earlier in the elevator ride were hanging. Who hung them? Hand unit opens up the doorway to Funtime Foxy's area where even Funtime Foxy is missing from. We reach the conveyor belt where we find Circus Baby, assumingly deactivated. Baby says she's pretending because the cameras were watching, and that something bad happened yesterday, and that something bad always happened, and that she didn't want it to happen again. Something bad was inside of her. She was lying. But we continued to listen to her. We opened the hatch with the chip attached to her arm and put it in hand unit and sent her off to have her body get scooped. Something in the background was moving, although it's too hard to make out who or what it was, but something was there. We listened to Baby and head back to Funtime Auditorium, listen to her instructions to reach the scooping room, where we are met with dialogue from hand unit saying we entered a highly restricted area, and we see an amalgamation with the voice of Baby talking in front of us, saying they always put them back together and that they had no place to hide here. There was no place to go when we looked like this, but if we look like you, we could hide. If we look like you, then we would have somewhere to go. The scooper only hurts for a moment. You get scooped, and the amalgamation is free. Circus Baby's actions throughout the story always had malicious intentions. She acted as a friend and even explained her entire act of pretending, yet even in the end we listened to her. However, there was actually a reason why Eggs Benedict came back to the location. Eggs Benedict, who is actually Michael Afton as revealed in the Custom Night, is the character we play as in this game, who was very aware of what was happening, and I'll explain that later when we get to the Custom Night DLC. But for now, let's talk about the fake ending. If you decide not to listen to Baby after getting the chip from her and go forward and right, we find ourselves in the private room. Ennard, the name of the amalgamation, is a combination of all the fun times. The design consists of wires and different colored eyes using the clown mask that was in the office to cover its face. They use the voice of Circus Baby to communicate to Michael, who starts questioning why he didn't listen to them, and that they did everything right, asking to be let in. One of the lines that Ennard refers to is Michael coming to this place to be with her again, using the voice of the girl that could be heard in the intermission cutscenes between the nights. Beating the night, we're able to escape and get our exotic butters gift basket. However, watching through the final episode of the show we watched after every night, we see Ennard slowly making its way towards fading to black. I should mention that this is the fake ending again. Now, before we can actually conclude Circus Baby's story, we have to take a look at the death minigames and the intermission cutscenes. So let's take a peek at the death minigames first. Although rather normal and only appears if you die sometimes, there's actually a hidden layer to it. If you manage to feed all the children, the cupcakes and ice cream appears at the end of the minigame, which you have to run all the way back to the beginning to use it. Once you do, a little girl walks into frame from the left side, slowly approaching Circus Baby, who is offering an ice cream to her. When she gets close enough, Circus Baby grabs the child with a claw and stuffs her inside her chest, cutting to black with a loud scream playing. Now, if we recall Circus Baby's story from night 3, this is exactly the chain of events that happened. However, with the cutscene between nights, what happened before this is told. The little girl was persistent in trying to go and see Circus Baby and kept questioning why her father wouldn't let her near the robot. After a while, her father left, and she got the opportunity to see Circus Baby, so she took it. And the last thing she ever said was, "Where did the other children go?" Her father knew exactly what was wrong with the robot and kept her away intentionally. Let's look back at the story pieced together now. Circus Baby kept count of the children because she was programmed to do so, and the little girl who showed up by herself happened to be the little girl in the cutscenes begging her father to let her go and see the robot. The girl moved closer to the robot, which Circus Baby had ice cream in hand now as she did. The little girl got too close and the robot snapped and grabbed her. According to Circus Baby, she can still hear her sometimes. And if you notice the blue eyes in the baby sprite, her eyes were blue, and the little girl's eyes were green, which just so happens to be how Baby's eyes look now. So the spirit of the girl went on to possess Circus Baby in the end. As far as the storyline goes, that was everything in the base game. But in the meantime, let's take a look at the environments of the game. Sister Location completely moved away from the Pizzeria setting for the games, and so did the FNaF games, starting with FNaF 4, which took place in a house instead of a pizzeria. But Sister Location is an underground bunker of sorts, so this was like the definitive starting point to leading more towards into the sci-fi aspect of the games. The rooms of the different locations are filled with weird looking robot things, wires, control panels, buttons, keypads, and so on. These areas are basically made for a technician. If we take a look at the main office, the Ender mask is actually on full display since the beginning, so the idea of it being an actual important part of the game is not something you'd think of since you got all these other things here as well. But that's if you didn't look at the teasers leading up to Sister Location at least. Which, if you actually look at the Ender teasers, it says there's a little bit of me in everybody. which is ironic. But on the topic of teasers, something of importance from earlier is about the Springlock suit in Night 4. Baby mentions that the suit from her old location, which actually gets referred to as Circus Baby's Pizza World in one of the teasers as well, which doesn't get expanded on, but it's a nice info bit that can be overlooked easily. Now, one last thing. In the break room area, we're up against Funtime Freddy. On the monitor we use to repair the different areas, we can actually see a bunch of rooms all over the place, seemingly connecting to this location. The top right is actually similar to the Five Nights at Freddy's 4's house map, and the one on the bottom is similar to the plush trap hallway. And as for the one on the top left, it looks close enough to the layout of Fredbear's and the house we go through during the minigames leading up to the party. But if we take 1 second to go back to the private room area during the Night 5 section and enter the code 1983, we actually get cameras peeking into the FNaF 4 house. Now, what does this all mean? Well, if we actually really focus on what's happening here when you repair the observation rooms, the Fredbear's looking map and the FNaF 4 house map layout both get fixed. Alright, now that we've gone over the environments, this finally brings us to the Custom Night DLC. Now, obviously, since this is just an expansion pack, there isn't a lot to go over, but the actual important stuff comes from the cutscenes you get when you get the max difficulty on the challenges. Every time you beat them, a special cutscene plays showing off who we can assume to be Michael walking away from the location happily, but as you continue to beat them, Michael's body slowly starts to rot and turn purple, causing his neighbors to actually become fearful of him. But it eventually gets to the point where he fully turns purple and whatever was in him is forced to come out. Michael spits out Ennard, who ends up in the sewers with Circus Baby talking now, saying you won't die repeatedly. Michael eventually gets up, no longer a lifeless puppet being controlled. Now, if you actually manage to beat Golden Freddy mode max difficulty, you would be gifted with the final cutscene, revealing Michael's motivations on finding his sister, questioning his mortality, and finally going on a hunt to find his father, which brings us to the end of the sister location. Now, let's skip into the future, to the grand conclusion of the Five Nights at Freddy storyline, at least at the time. Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. FNaF 6, or most commonly known as Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, which was actually at some point going to be the finale to the series, which is a very common thing to happen in this franchise for some reason, but ultimately this game tied up a lot of loose ends that could be considered the true ending to the games if you wanted to. FFPS was primarily focused on the story with this entry, of course not handing all the lore away on the silver platter, but hiding into the details of the different parts of the gameplay. Of course, this game is a lot bigger than SL was content-wise, so I'll be dividing everything into mini sections, which we will start off with the characters first. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator's character roster is massive for this entry, and for the sake of not diverging off topic, I will be focusing on the main cast of characters instead of all of them. The main antagonists are the scrap animatronics, and the important side character is Cassette Man, who actually guides you through everything regarding paragraph 4. So let's start with the animatronics first, and of course we're going to start with Scrap Baby since she needs some context for why she even exists in the first place. At some point during the release of the Scrap Baby teaser, a conversation was held between two different websites, being FNAFworld.com and ScottGames.com. Now, obviously at first the conversation would be confusing on who was talking, but using certain keywords, and also the fact the conversation has a very manipulative undertone, the word dummy gets used at some point, so if you can put two and two together, this is a conversation between all the fun times versus Circus Baby. They eventually eject her from the amalgamation and she's left to rebuild herself, where the last line that's ever said in the conversation is that she'll put herself back together, and that's exactly what she did. Alright, now we can look at her design. Scrap Baby, which if it wasn't obvious from her name, is Scraps put together in a suit. Obviously following her original design from Sister Location, but with a more sinister twist on it. This time with a claw completely replacing her hand, and a sharper hand to follow along with that, and a more orange coat of paint. Now also having roller skates for feet and more scary eyes that glow green. Now what can be assumed what actually occurred with where she got her parts from is she might have actually traveled back to the Sister Location at some point because of the spotlight shoved into her chest. However, there isn't enough to go off of her character design to justify that at all. Let's move on to Molten Freddy now. Molten Freddy is the aftermath of kicking Scrap Baby out. Mainly still wires just like their previous design as Ennard, but this time rocking a destroyed Freddy-like mask with sharp teeth instead of the Ennard mask, and betraying themselves using Funtime Freddy's voice to speak. Similar to Scrap Baby, the color palette is a copper orangish color design on the Freddy mask and bow tie. Now for Afton, or also famously known as Scrap Trap. Scrap Trap has no proper explanation for why he looks like this now, but is still Afton. The Springtrap design that is seen at the end of the Sister Location Custom Night is known as Dark Springtrap, but the only really visible design change is the missing pelvis. So if this was actually what the Springtrap was supposed to look like, I don't really know, because it's considered an individual design for some reason. So whatever happened to Scrap Trap took place during whatever occurred after Fazbear Frights burnt down. The main difference you'll see with this design specifically is that bone is actually way more visible in the suit, and especially in the arms. Scraptrap's left arm is missing the bottom half and has instead been replaced with a sharp toothpick-like bone, and his head is also completely different from what we've seen with Springtrap in the past, and having eyes that are completely drained of color. Now finally, Lefty. Lefty is technically a new antagonist and not a reoccurring character, but obviously whatever's in the suit is a very important character from the past, but that will be explained later. Lefty has a very similar design to Rockstar Freddy, and his mic, of course following the name, is held in the left hand. His left eye is also missing, however the right eye is still intact and has an orange pupil. So with that, we can finally move on to Henry. This is the first time Henry has actually appeared in the game's side of the Charlie trilogy, where he was originally introduced and had worked with Afton from the very beginning. So obviously with this game he takes the role of a guide, and does so by using a cassette tape, hence getting the name of Cassette Man. Now obviously since there is no design to really analyze in this game specifically, I just wanted to provide a little bit of origins for his character, since I'll be bringing it up again in a future section, and since he's technically a new character right now. So let's go ahead and move on to the minigames and their importance. FNaF 6's story is told through very specific minigames that have dark twists attached to them, and aren't what they actually seem to be. And those minigames are Fruity Maze, Midnight Motorist, and Security Puppets minigame, which are all needed to unlock the Lore Keeper certificate. Fruity Maze is a Pac-Man type game where you have to collect all the fruits scattered across the map with the help of power-ups like a speed buff, magnet, or no-clip effect, which actually appears to look like a cape of sorts. However, the main thing to keep note of is this little girl that appears for a short amount of time when you collect enough fruits to add more time to the clock. The minigame has 3 phases. Phase 1 is completely normal, but Phase 2 starts to cause the game to become more twisted. The music becomes slower, and the orange fruit has been replaced by a dog that's bleeding out with his legs missing. The girl in the background has noticeably become more sad as well. Beating this phase will bring us to the final phase. The uppy, happy maze game is no longer what it once was. The music has become distorted and even more slowed down. The dog has become even more mutilated with more blood scattered around it. The other 2 fruits that used to be here were replaced with a coffin and flowers. Blood was now dropping from the character we controlled, and the girl that was playing the arcade is now crying, while a spring Bonnie-like figure was standing on the side of her. The timer continued to count down until the last 10 seconds remained. The music suddenly stopped. A car horn could be heard until it stopped once the timer reached 0. Spring Bonnie starts to speak, saying that the dog wasn't dead, that he was over here, and to follow me. The game ends, no longer being able to be played again at all. The minigame by itself is by far the most tense minigame of the 3 games that y'all have to play. The minigame's implications with the bleeding out dog and the sudden car horn could very much indicate that the dog was murdered by a car, and that it was the little girl's dog and the murderer was right next to her the entire time. Throughout the game, there was a chance to spot golden bunnies in areas where food had been collected previously, popping out occasionally, but started to appear a lot more towards the end of Phase 3, which was foreshadowing what was actually happening here since the start as a subtle indicator of Spring Bonnie. Now, let's move on to Midnight Motorist. Midnight Motorist is the only one of the 3 games that doesn't require you to play the game multiple times, although the way to find the secret path in this game is during the final lap towards the end. There would be a hole in the wall that would lead you to another area. As you continue through the path, there's a secret grave or mound that you can find, but as far as its importance goes, no one really knows what its purpose is. Going back to the main road, another road can be taken where it takes you to a location called Juniors, where if you try to enter, the person blocking the entrance says that you know you can't be here, and to not make things more difficult than it has to be. Leaving the area, you continue down the path, and the music starts to fade out more and more as the rain gets louder. You arrive at a house that looks completely abandoned and isolated. Going inside, you'll find someone sleeping on the couch, and getting close enough to the couch, dialogue will show up that says to leave him alone tonight and that he had a rough day. As you progress through the house, you run into a closed door. Trying to enter, the door ended up blocked, and you attempt to leave. However, the man became upset, trying to get into the room again by slamming on the door over and over again, saying to open up the door. They decided it would be best to try and get in from the outside, so you leave the house to go around to the back to find a broken window, the footprints of a person, and footprints of a creature that wasn't human. The game ends with the man saying that they ran out to that place again, and they'll be sorry when he gets back. Midnight Motorist has to be one of the biggest problems as far as lore goes for a lot of theorists for the longest time, because there wasn't a lot to work off of, unless you go into the code of the game, where you find the debug text saying later that night. But if you're looking at it from a non-theorist perspective, this minigame is showing that whoever we play as in this game might not be the best person. They must have done something bad to be banned from the Juniors location we saw in the game. Not only that, the minigame from the start, we see the man speeding down the highway at really high speeds, plus it's made very clear that whatever relationship they have with who I'm assuming to be a kid in the locked room is not very good because they keep running away. But that's just using what the game was giving to us through the detail of the game. And as far as the mound goes, it's unknown what it could be or what it's for. For the last minigame needed for the Lore Keeper ending brings us to the Security Puppet minigame. The Security Puppet minigame has you playing as the puppet, who is tasked with not letting a child with the green wristband from leaving the pizzeria. The minigame has 3 phases. 2 of which the green wristband child never appears in, but things take a huge twist in phase 3. The music is gone, you can hear the rain hitting the building now, and 3 children stand by the exit door blocking off the puppet's box, not allowing it to escape. A child with the green wristband appears trying to get back in, but the children leave. The puppet manages to escape, but the child isn't at the window anymore, so the puppet is forced to leave the building. The rain starts hitting the robot, slowly destroying it, causing it to become more deformed, but it pushes on until it reaches where the child ended up at. Her laying down right next to a bunch of trash cans facing towards the wall. The puppet lays down right next to her, fully decommissioned now because of the rain, and the minigame slowly fades to black. This minigame is a direct callback to Take Cake to the Children, where the death of a child happens outside the establishment, which ends with a puppet jump scare occurring after the tragedy. These 2 minigames are directly connected, both showing the death of Charlie, the daughter of Henry Emily.
Congratulations on completing your first day. However, your job isn't over just yet. There is another aspect to your end-of-day routine, and that is inspecting and salvaging any animatronics found in the alley outside the back door.
Welcome to the salvage section of the game. This part of the game is basically audio-induced fear throughout all of it, so being able to pay attention to slight sound changes and movement changes is key to defending yourself against the animatronics. There are 5 phases which slowly increase the duration of the audio tests, containing a mix of different sounds possibly from the different games that you have to sit through, but also almost completely block out any external sound that potentially would have alerted you that the animatronics were going to attack. Patience and timing is key, since you can pause the tape at any point to listen closely, and if the animatronic were to seem aggressive, you can shock it back using the taser mechanic to its original idle phase. Each of the scrap animatronics have their own sound indicators like I stated earlier. Molten Freddy's is scratching/clicking, Scrap Traps is a heartbeat, Scrap Babies is clicking/tapping, and Lefties is gear grinding. The thing with the sound effects is that these sounds could literally play at any point and stop at any point, so making sure that you pay close attention is key to winning. Outside of that, you can also hear crickets in the background, thus wrapping up the salvage room part of the game. The night section of the game doesn't really have a lot going for it except for the change of atmosphere, and this time you have no cameras at all and only 2 vents to look into. The monitors can help track the animatronics, but for the most part you're completely vulnerable at all times. Luckily, however, there is no time limit and you can play at your own pace. The animatronics will make sound cues as they get closer to the office on either the left or right, so like in the salvage section, paying close attention to sound design is important. Otherwise, we can move on to what the tycoon part of the game has to offer. Risk is the only enemy in the tycoon section, which can bring in any unwanted enemies into the pizzeria during the office section. However, for the most part, certain minigames have Easter egg voice lines, such as Candy Cadet or the Lemon Punch Clown, who has quite an interesting voice line.
Tell anyone about this and I cut your throat.
However, for Candy Cadet, he has 3 stories to offer: 5 keys, 5 kittens, and 5 orphans. The summary of all of them is that the 5 entities all unfortunately end up with death or suffering and being twisted into one entity or thing. There was no happy ending. Actually, speaking of endings, in FNaF 6, there are 5 endings you can achieve depending on how you decide to play the game. However, only 2 of the endings are more important than the other 3, one being the insanity ending. The insanity ending actually gives an explanation on why Henry was doing all of this. But the only way to activate this ending is to purchase the Egg Baby Data Archive and turn off the monitor during the night section and hold the power button. Then turning it back on activates the audio lock from Henry, as referred to in the bottom left corner. Henry talked about how his work had attachment to all of the tragedies that Afton caused, and how Henry was connected to all of it with his creations. Being unable to sleep at night because of it, Afton robbed them of their lives and went on to inhabit the robots, but Henry doesn't understand how. However, the only way for him to clear up everything is to gather them all together into one place, to close the wound that was left to bleed out for far too long. There was different images that showed up on the screen throughout the speech, showing the Scooper or Scoop, Lefty or Lefty, and Rask, which is also assumed to be a device used for luring. Once the speech is finished, you're then told that you're going to be sent away. And finally, the completion ending. The ending finally gives Henry's happy ending, being able to try and set free the souls that ended up living inside of these suits for so long and ending Afton's mayhem, saying that the darkest pit of hell is open to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. Henry was also able to help his daughter after all these years, especially after that day, when no one else was there to help her and save her, and knew deep down that she wouldn't move on as she had always tried to protect and help others, even after her death. This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of every tragedy should. This ends, for all of us, end communication. Hello everyone, been a long time, huh? Well, originally I wasn't going to include this at the end of the video, but here we are. I just want to first mention that this is the final part of the Horror Hidden in Detail series, which originally wasn't even going to be made, but hey, I did it anyways. And as for future videos, they will most likely be way shorter than this because I almost canceled this project like on 4 different occasions. However, I do have one big video coming out in the future about Afton, so yeah, just stay on the lookout for that still. I also just wanted to say thank you for the support of my channel this year. I honestly in a million years never thought I'd hit 1K subs at all, but here we are. And yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you all on the flip side. Goodbye.